This story begins in the year 1865, when the American Civil War was drawing its final breaths. That night, the harbor was in a state of utter chaos. Soldiers were loading heavy, massive crates onto a colossal ship. Upon those crates, only 3 letters were inscribed, CSA. But as to what lay inside those crates, only the ship's captain had the slightest inkling. Those crates, filled with gold, were so valuable that their sheer worth could have turned the tide of the entire war. Then, suddenly, the entire sky reverberated with the sound of gunfire. The enemy had attacked. Gunsmoke, screams, and pandemonium spread in every direction. Yet the ship's captain did not panic. He immediately cut the ship's engines, and utilizing the cover of the dense darkness, made that floating fortress vanish somewhere into the vast ocean. After that night, neither was the ship ever found, nor was that treasure worth billions. Time passed, and gradually, this story faded into nothing more than a mystery. But the real game was just about to begin. The present day. A WHO medical van was speeding along the dusty roads of Nigeria. Inside the van sat Dr. Sophia. Fear was clearly visible on her face, for a highly dangerous virus was spreading rapidly through this region. A virus against which even medical science appeared helpless. The number of patients suffering in hospitals was rising by the hour, and death was stalking people like a shadow. Just then, Sophia examined a new patient, but the moment she reviewed the reports and symptoms, the color drained from her face. This was no ordinary illness, the patient's mother explained through her tears. A few days ago, he went to Mali with his father, and that is where this disease returned with him. That was the very clue that shook Sophia to her core. By now, 6 people had already died from this mysterious virus, and Sophia realized that if immediate action wasn't taken, this disease could claim the lives of thousands. She immediately alerted her senior officials, but the response she received was, "No major agency will take action based on such a low number of cases." The system had its own constraints, but Sophia was not one to give up. She made a decision. She would go to Mali herself, to Mali, which, at that very moment, was engulfed in the flames of civil war. Her senior issued a final warning. Going there is tantamount to inviting death itself. But Sophia's resolve had now hardened like stone. She had absolutely no idea that a masked figure standing outside the hospital window was watching her every move. Sophia soon discovered that the true link to this disease lay with a lighthouse keeper. She immediately headed to that old lighthouse situated by the sea. But the scene that greeted her there left her frozen in her tracks. The man was dead. His body bore grim testimony to the fact that the virus had become far more dangerous than ever before. Despite her fear, Sophia mustered her courage and extracted a blood sample from his body for analysis. But just as she stepped outside, suddenly, that same masked assailant lunged at her. Sophia didn't even have a chance to brace herself before the attack began. And then, a man who had been boating out at sea arrived on the scene. His name was Duck. Without a second thought, Duck risked his own life and somehow managed to save Sophia from the attacker. But amidst the scuffle, a grave error occurred. The assailant had snatched Sophia's bag and fled, and inside that bag was the most critical blood sample of the virus. When Sophia regained consciousness, she found herself aboard a magnificent ship. The ship was named the Noma, but this was no ordinary vessel. It was the base of operations for those who dedicated themselves to unearthing history buried deep within the ocean's depths. Duck, the man who had saved Sophia's life, now returned to the ship bearing an incredibly ancient statue. The statue had been recovered from the tomb of an African sultan and was worth billions. The owner of the ship was Almora, and he had but one dream: to locate the mysterious CSA ship that had vanished in 1865. That very night, a lavish party was held aboard the ship. Wealthy guests, dazzling lights, and priceless historical artifacts were everywhere. But then, Duck crossed paths with a Nigerian dealer. The dealer quietly slipped a gold coin into his palm. The moment Duck laid eyes on the coin, his breath caught in his throat, for etched upon that coin was the very same symbol, CSA, the very same symbol that had been stamped upon the crates of that lost ship. Duck asked in alarm, "Where did you find this?" The dealer smiled and spoke softly, "In Mali, from a stranger." That was all Duck needed to hear to realize the greatest treasure in history is still buried somewhere within the soil of Mali. James was present at that very party, a powerful businessman whose company had invested millions of dollars in this entire expedition. He had deep connections in Mali. Seizing the opportunity, Sophia approached James and asked for his help. She said, "If I could just be transported to Mali, I might be able to find a cure for this virus." James hesitated at first, for at that moment, Mali had become a hotbed of war, terror, and death. But eventually, he agreed. Just then, Duck came running up and placed the gold coin before James. Duck spoke with absolute conviction. "Sir, that ship is hidden somewhere within Mali. I need permission to go there." Greed and excitement flashed simultaneously in James's eyes. He delivered his verdict immediately. "You have exactly 3 days. Find that ship and bring it back." The next morning, a new expedition was about to set sail from the harbor. Duck and his team arrived there, fully prepared, but they were astonished by the scene that greeted them, for Dr. Sophia and her colleague, Dr. Jack, were also standing there with their gear in tow. Now, the hunt for treasure and the battle to save human lives. Their paths had converged into one, and the name of that path was Mali. It had begun with nothing more than a simple agreement, but no one had any idea that this journey would plunge them into a vortex of death, conspiracy, and destruction, from which returning might prove utterly impossible. When Sophia informed Duck that, with James's approval, she and Dr. Jack were now to be part of the mission, this group of 5 set out upon a path, the ultimate end of which remained unknown to all. That night, the sea was exceptionally calm. All around, only the gentle murmur of the waves echoed through the air. Everyone sat on the ship, sharing a meal. But Duck seemed lost in his own thoughts. There was a strange restlessness in his eyes. Finally, he broke the silence, and for the first time, revealed the secret buried deep in his heart, the very secret that had robbed him of his sleep for years. Duck spoke in a hushed voice. "Finding that lost ship is no longer just an obsession. It has become the very purpose of my life." In his eyes, there was no gleam of treasure, but rather the visible pain of an unfulfilled life. The next morning, as soon as the team set foot on the soil of Mali, their paths diverged. Sophia and Dr. Jack set out to uncover the truth behind that mysterious illness, while Duck, along with his companions, went off in search of the man who had given them the gold coin bearing the CSA inscription. But upon their arrival, their hopes suffered their first major blow. The man they were looking for had died long ago. Duck stood silent for a few moments. It felt as though the final door leading to the treasure had been shut forever. Amidst that despair, Duck's gaze fell upon an old mosque standing nearby. Ancient places often harbor secrets of history, secrets that even the passage of time cannot erase. Duck stepped inside and began speaking with an elderly man he found there. When the man produced some old, yellowed documents, a truth emerged that left everyone stunned. Years ago, a mysterious ship had docked at this very quay, but every single person aboard that ship was dead. No one knew how they had met their end, and before the villagers could even comprehend what was happening, the surging waves of the ocean swept the ship back out to sea. Duck understood now. That ship was not merely a legend. It was real. And perhaps it still existed somewhere out there. Without wasting a moment, their boats set course toward the city of Gao. En route, Duck's eyes suddenly fell upon the hull of the boat. A strange kind of silt and rust had accumulated there. Duck's brow furrowed. It was impossible for such sediment to gather in fast-flowing water. The implication was clear. Somewhere nearby, something existed. Something that had lain submerged beneath the water for years. But before Duck could dwell on this any further, trouble loomed before them. Suddenly, slicing through the water, a military patrol boat pulled up and halted right in front of them. Guns were trained directly upon them. The officer shouted, "Where are those 2 foreign doctors?" Mali's dictatorial ruler, King Kazim, had received word that 2 foreign doctors were on the verge of uncovering a hidden truth about his country, and he was determined, at any cost, not to let this secret be exposed to the world. Duck realized the truth. This disease was no mere accident. The hand of power lay behind it, but to fight back at that moment would have been suicide. So Duck devised a stratagem. Speaking in broken English, he feigned an attempt to dock their boat at the riverbank. Then, he casually tossed a rope toward their vessel. The moment the soldiers secured the rope, Duck signaled his companions. In the very next instant, their boat surged forward at full throttle. There was a violent jolt, and the military boat capsized, tumbling into the water. Duck immediately severed the rope, and they sped away from the scene. But death was not yet ready to relinquish its pursuit. Just a short distance away, 2 more armed boats lay in wait for them. Suddenly, a hail of bullets rained down upon them. Water erupted all around them. Duck realized that if they remained on the boat, they would be riddled with bullets within the next few seconds. It was then that he made a perilous decision. Before leaping into the water, he slashed open the boat's fuel tank, allowing the oil to spill rapidly across the surface. And then, all 3 of them plunged into the river, vanishing into the depths below. The enemies thought they were still hiding in the boat. They opened fire indiscriminately, but the very next moment, the oil ignited, and a terrifying explosion shook the entire river. Both of the attackers' boats had turned into fireballs. After somehow managing to scramble out of the river, the 3 of them took shelter in a dilapidated house. Gasping for breath, Rudy spoke. "Now we don't even have a boat left. Shouldn't we just call off this search right here?" Duck remained silent for a few moments, but the greed for treasure was no longer visible in his eyes. Only concern remained. He spoke in a low yet firm voice. "The ship can be found later. Right now, saving those doctors is what matters." He had realized that the army was now hot on the heels of Sophia and Jack. Duck instructed Rudy to cross the border and head back toward Almora, while he himself, along with James, set out to find the doctors. Meanwhile, Sophia and Dr. Jack had reached a village, where Death had pitched its camp. The entire village lay deserted. Silence screamed through the narrow lanes. Doors swaying in the breeze seemed to beckon with an ominous, ghostly gesture. The moment Sophia pushed open the door to one of the houses, she let out a piercing scream. Inside lay a heap of corpses, small children, the elderly, women. No one had survived. The virus had devoured the entire village. Until daybreak, the 2 doctors continued to bury the innocent victims. During this time, Sophia's gaze fell upon an old well situated in the center of the village. She suspected that the secret to the outbreak might be hidden within its waters. Using a rope for support, she slowly descended into the well. It was pitch black down below. She was just about to collect a water sample when, suddenly, Jack's panicked voice echoed down from above. "Sophia, don't come up. The military has arrived." And in the very next instant, the entire village was rocked by the sound of gunfire. The soldiers began ruthlessly gunning down every living soul present there. However, they captured Jack alive, hidden in the cold, dark depths of the well. Sophia listened to everything, holding her breath. Her entire body trembled with fear. Just then, the roar of a helicopter echoed across the sky. Mere seconds later, a helicopter touched down in the center of the village. Stepping out of it was Mali's ruthless dictator, King Kazim. His eyes held nothing but pure cruelty. He pressed a gun against Jack's neck and demanded in a thunderous voice, "Where is that woman?" Hidden in the distant bushes, Duck and James watched it all unfold in helpless despair. They had arrived at the right place, but it was already too late. Jack did not reveal Sophia's secret, not even with his dying breath, and that became the cause of his death. Blinded by rage, Kazim fired without a second thought, shooting Jack directly in the chest. Jack's body slumped to the dust. Before Sophia's very eyes, it seemed as though everything had come to an end. Kazim roared, "Scour the entire area! I want that doctor alive!" The soldiers fanned out into every corner of the village. During their search, one soldier stumbled right up to the very bush where Duck was hiding. Duck's breath caught in his throat. Death stood just a few steps away, but then a figure emerged from the dark well. It was Sophia. There was no longer fear in her eyes, only fire. She attacked the soldier from behind with every ounce of her strength and took his life right there on the spot. Duck's life had been saved, but when Sophia's gaze fell upon Jack's lifeless body, The tears in her eyes had now transformed into the burning fire of vengeance. This fight was no longer merely against a virus. Now, this was a war to bring down a blood-soaked empire. The soldier's corpse lay left behind, yet the danger still loomed ominously over them. Duck swiftly scanned his surroundings and spoke in a hushed tone. "We have to get out of here, right now. This entire ground is sitting on a powder keg." Without wasting a moment, the three of them fled the scene, but little did they know that their true terror now awaited them. They had traveled only a short distance when, suddenly, a massive cloud of dust was seen surging toward them. The very next instant, armed horsemen descended upon them like a storm. The three of them didn't even have a chance to brace themselves, and in the blink of an eye, they were taken captive. Their hands were bound, and they were dragged before a massive tent. Seated there was the tribe's sultan, Godgo. His booming voice reverberated through the entire atmosphere. "How dare you set foot upon our land?" Composing herself, Sophia replied, "I am a doctor, and I've come to uncover the truth behind the death that looms over your people." At the mere mention of the epidemic, Godgo's expression shifted. The eyes that, moments ago, had been blazing with rage were now clouded with fear. Without uttering a word, he signaled to his men. A short while later, the three of them were led into a sealed cellar. As the door creaked open, Sophia's breath caught in her throat. Corpses lay scattered everywhere. Children, women, the elderly. Some lay with their eyes wide open, while on others' faces, the agony of their final moments was frozen in place. The entire cellar reeked of death. Sophia approached each body, one by one, and within seconds, the truth became plainly visible upon her face. She spoke in a voice that was soft, yet resolute. "This is the same virus." Then, turning her gaze toward Godgo, she added, "Your people were not killed by a disease, but by poison." A profound silence fell over the cellar. A few moments later, for the first time, Godgo had his men lower their weapons. He had realized that these people were not enemies. Perhaps they were the last hope, and in that very moment, he granted the three of them refuge within his tribe. The next morning, Sophia began testing the water from the tribe's well. She analyzed samples of the water using her medical kit, but the moment she saw the results, her eyes widened in shock. The water was poisonous, and the most dangerous part was this. It was no natural disease. Someone had deliberately laced the water with death. When Godgo learned this truth, his rage erupted. He clenched his fists and roared, "Whoever has done this to my people, I will not let them live." Now the entire tribe stood united behind Sophia. Meanwhile, James was trying to lighten the mood by playing football with the tribe's children. For the first time in days, perhaps, smiles had returned to those children's faces. But then, a powerful kick sent the ball flying, far beyond the sand dunes. James stepped forward to retrieve the ball, but the moment he reached the spot, he froze. Before him, carved into the stones, were some incredibly ancient symbols. He began to examine them closely, and suddenly, his breath caught in his throat. Depicted in those carvings was that very CSA ship, the very ship for which Duck had staked his entire life to find. James realized the truth. That ship had not sunk in the ocean. It lay buried beneath the sands of this desert. Just then, Duck and Sophia arrived at the scene. Gazing out across the parched earth, Duck spoke. 200 years ago, a river flowed here, but with the passage of time, it dried up. Then his eyes fell upon another sign. Peeking out from beneath the sand, the upper structure of an ancient fortress was visible, and in that instant, a sudden realization flashed through Duck's mind. He spoke rapidly. "Do you guys understand? The toxic water reaching this tribe is actually the water from this very dried-up river?" He pointed toward the ground. "The river has vanished from the surface, but deep beneath, its current is still alive." Now, all the pieces of the puzzle were finally falling into place. The three of them immediately set off along the ancient course of the dried-up river. After a considerable time, amidst the scorching desert, a massive fortress loomed before their eyes. But the moment they reached the top, they were left utterly stunned. Perched atop the fortress was a modern solar plant belonging to the Mascot Company. Duck was baffled. A multi-million-dollar facility in such a desolate desert? Something was definitely amiss. Just then, his gaze fell upon a freight train standing a short distance away. The three of them crept stealthily toward it and quietly hid themselves inside one of the freight cars. Meanwhile, Rudy had somehow managed to cross the borders and reach Almora. Acting on Duck's instructions, he had submitted the strange red substance recovered from the boat for laboratory analysis. But the moment the results came in, the color drained from Almora's face. That report was nothing short of a bombshell. Without wasting a single moment, both men headed straight for the U.S. Embassy, and when the officials there saw the report, a stunned silence fell over the room as well. For now, the truth had become starkly clear. It wasn't merely a disease spreading across Mali. Rather, a sinister conspiracy against humanity itself was unfolding. Back at the site, Duck, Sophia, and James had successfully infiltrated the facility. But the reality they encountered inside left them completely shaken. This was no ordinary solar plant. Under the guise of solar panels, highly dangerous radioactive chemicals were being manufactured here, and the scorching heat of the desert was accelerating the production of these toxic substances even further. Sophia observed several masked workers were using a lift to transport heavy containers down into the subterranean levels of the facility. The three of them began to follow him in silence. As the massive iron door to the basement swung open, Sophia was left utterly speechless. Below them lay thousands of tons of toxic chemicals. Many of the containers had completely corroded away, and the poisonous acid seeping from them was flowing directly into the secret underground river running beneath the facility. The very same river that supplied water to the entire nation of Mali. This was the true cause of the epidemic. People weren't dying from a disease. They were being slowly poisoned. But before they could make their escape, armed commandos surrounded them from every side, and then a man stepped out of the shadows. Mr. Mascot, the owner of the Mascot Company. Looking directly into Sophia's eyes, he asked, "How did you manage to find your way here?" Sophia's rage finally erupted. She screamed, "This factory of yours has killed thousands of innocent people." Mascot tried to defend himself. "I am not a murderer. We merely dispose of this waste." But pointing toward the ground, Sophia retorted, "Look beneath your feet. Your containers are leaking, and that very poison is making its way into people's bodies." At these words, the color drained from Mascot's face. He had no idea that his negligence had resulted in such a catastrophic disaster, but now it was too late. Terrified of being caught, Mascot issued an immediate order. Duck and James were bound in chains and thrown into a truck. But Duck was not one to give up so easily. Inside the moving truck, he pulled that same gold coin from his pocket, and using its sharp edge, he slowly began to saw through the lock. A few seconds later, the truck door swung open, and in the very next instant, Duck and James leaped out of the moving vehicle. Meanwhile, a panicked Mascot rushed straight to King Kazim's palace. He told Kazim everything: the toxic water, the leaking containers, and Sophia's investigation. Mascot said, "We have to shut down the plant." But there was no humanity in Kazim's eyes, only greed. With a cold laugh, he replied, "If that doctor is so concerned about the people, then let her provide the cure." Then looking straight into Mascot's eyes, he added, "I want only my share, even if the entire world outside dies." It was now abundantly clear. This was not merely negligence. It was an open massacre perpetrated for the sake of money and power. The scorching sands of the desert, iron chains shackled around their wrists, and a silence even more profound than death itself. Duck and James were now at the mercy of fate. Even after leaping from the moving truck, their hands remained bound to that heavy iron door. The searing sand scorched their feet, and every ounce of their physical strength had given out. It felt as though the desert were slowly swallowing them alive. But then, on the distant horizon, they caught a glimpse of a broken structure. Staggering, they made their way toward it. It was the wreckage of an old crashed airplane. Its fuselage was completely destroyed, but by a stroke of luck, its wheels remained intact. Gasping for breath, Duck spoke. "This is our last hope." Gathering their remaining reserves of strength, they began to drag the heavy wreckage across the sand. After a grueling struggle, they managed to push it toward a slope. And then, the wreckage slid down the sandy incline, landing in the territory of an unknown tribe. Upon reaching the settlement, Duck's first act was to call Almora. He exposed the full, horrific truth hidden within the solar plant: toxic water, radioactive chemicals, and the deaths of thousands of people. The game had changed, but before the world could learn the truth, they had to return to that very den of death. Without wasting a single moment, Duck sold his most prized possession, that very gold coin bearing the CSA insignia, the very coin for which he had risked his life. Today he sold it for a pittance, solely so that he could purchase an old Jeep. Duck and James headed straight to Sultan Godgo's encampment. Looking Godgo square in the eye, Duck said, "If Kazim isn't stopped, all of Mali will perish." He asked Godgo for an army to fight Kazim. But Godgo knew the reality. He possessed neither modern weaponry nor a ferocious army like Kazim's. After a few moments of silence, he bowed his head. "I cannot send my people to their deaths." Yet humanity was not entirely dead. Godgo handed over his most powerful armored vehicle to Duck, and this was the very same vehicle that he himself had once purchased from Kazim. A short while later, Duck and James, riding in that very armored vehicle, arrived directly at the main gate of the solar plant. Upon spotting them, the security guards immediately raised their guns, but backing down was no longer an option. Duck rammed the vehicle into the gate at full speed. With a thunderous crash, the security barrier shattered, and the two of them stormed inside the plant. Meanwhile, sitting in the control room, Mascot was in a panic. He realized that his secret could not remain hidden for much longer. He immediately began making preparations to flee. But when Duck and James made it inside, the entire plant lay deserted. An eerie silence hung in the air. James instantly sensed the danger. He shouted, "Mascot is about to destroy the evidence!" And without a moment's delay, he sprinted toward the basement, for he was absolutely certain that to blow up a plant of this magnitude, explosives must surely have been planted somewhere within. Just then, the sound of a helicopter echoed from the sky. Mascot was forcibly dragging Sophia toward the chopper. The rotors were spinning furiously, and then Duck broke into a sprint and leaped. He headed straight for the Mascot. But just then, a guard grabbed Duck from behind. Amidst this chaos, Sophia did something no one could have ever imagined. She leapt out of the flying helicopter, and tumbling across the sand, somehow managed to save herself. Meanwhile, soaring through the air, the Mascot played his final card. Using a remote control, he altered the angle of the solar panels so that the sun's scorching heat would overload the entire plant. If that were to happen, the entire area would be engulfed in a massive explosion. But down below, James was racing faster than death itself. Finally, he located the main explosive device. With trembling hands, he severed the wires, and in the very next instant, the entire system shut down. The Mascot's suicidal plot had been foiled. Inside the helicopter, the Mascot seethed with rage. A short while later, Duck, Sophia, and James evaded the guards and sped away from the scene in their vehicle. But just then, a hail of bullets began raining down from the sky. This time, the dictator Kazim himself was in pursuit, piloting his gunship helicopter. The sound of gunfire echoed from every direction. Duck shouted, "James, keep tossing those explosives behind us." James began hurling the explosives onto the road, one after another. The moment the helicopter's gunfire struck them, the earth would quake from the force of the massive explosions. Such a colossal storm of smoke and sand rose up that the helicopter was forced to pull back. Yet, amidst that very chaos, nature unveiled a centuries-old secret to the world. The shockwaves from the blasts blew away the thick desert sand, and from beneath it slowly began to emerge that historic CSA ship. The entire ship, as if time itself had kept it hidden within its bosom for centuries. Duck's eyes widened in sheer astonishment. The ship he had spent his entire life searching for stood right before him today. The three of them immediately rushed inside the ship, but Kazim had spotted them as well. Within moments, hundreds of soldiers had completely surrounded the vessel. Indiscriminate gunfire erupted. The barrage of bullets shattered the ship's ancient chests, and gold coins, locked away for centuries, scattered across the entire floor. The clinking of gold coins resounded throughout the ship. For a few seconds, Duck simply stood there, staring at them. His dream, the very purpose of his life, lay right before his eyes today. But this was not the time for greed. It was the time to survive. Just then, Duck's gaze fell upon a corner of the ship. There, an old cannon still stood intact. Time had certainly left its mark of rust upon it, but it remained strong nonetheless. Together, the three of them loaded it with gunpowder. Duck took aim, straight at Kazim's helicopter. the moment the helicopter came within their range. Duck lit the fuse. The very next instant, a deafening explosion ripped through the air. The cannonball slammed directly into the helicopter's engine. The sky erupted into a massive fireball, and consumed by those very flames, the dictator, Kazim, met his end, witnessing the demise of their master. Kazim's entire army laid down their arms. A short while later, when Duck, Sophia, and James stepped out of the ship, they were astonished. How could such a massive army have surrendered so swiftly? But then they turned to look behind them, and smiles spread across their faces. Sultan Godgo stood there, flanked by thousands of his warriors. He had finally arrived to lend his aid. And in that very moment, the tide of battle turned completely. Yet this fire of justice was not confined solely to Mali. He handed over the entire treasure to Sultan Godgo and his tribe, for the true claim to it belonged to them alone, to those who had paid the ultimate price in this bloody conspiracy. And with that lost page of history finally found its way into the right hands. This bloody saga of the desert had come to an end. Forever. So, friends, how did you like this spine-chilling tale, filled with history, conspiracy, and death? Do you think Duck made the right decision by handing the treasure over to the tribe? Be sure to share your thoughts with us in the comments below. If this story kept you hooked until the very end, then don't forget to like and share this video. And for more stories filled with suspense, thrills, and mystery, be sure to subscribe to our channel. We'll see you next time with another terrifying and thrilling story. Until then, goodbye and stay vigilant.